The morning began with a low winter sun rising over the river that cut through the city, turning the glass towers of downtown into pale mirrors. Commuters poured from trains and buses, their footsteps sinking into a steady hum. Coffee carts hissed and steamed. Sirens drifted from far streets and faded again. In the middle of this movement walked a man named Isaiah Cole, his coat simple, his shoes scuffed, his face calm and observant. He moved with an unhurried pace that did not match the rush around him, as if he were passing through a memory rather than a schedule. Isaiah stopped at the edge of a wide plaza that opened toward the headquarters of Orion Systems, a technology firm known across the United States for its bold acquisitions and strict internal culture. The building rose in clean lines of steel and stone, guarded by rotating doors and uniformed security. Isaiah looked at it the way one might look at a childhood home long after leaving it behind. There was familiarity, a hint of warmth, and a weight that settled behind the eyes. He reached into his pocket and felt the smooth edge of a worn coin. It was a habit he had picked up years earlier, back when his life had been measured in buses and night classes rather than private flights and boardrooms. The coin grounded him. It reminded him of where patience came from. Around him, a cluster of employees gathered near the plaza fountain, laughing loudly as they waited for the doors to open for a corporate volunteer event scheduled that morning. Their jackets bore the Orion logo. They spoke of deadlines, bonuses, and the inconvenience of giving up a Saturday. Isaiah listened without appearing to. He had learned long ago that listening could be more revealing than speaking. One of the men noticed Isaiah standing apart and nudged another. Their eyes moved over his coat, his shoes, the canvas bag slung over his shoulder. The laughter shifted tone, grew sharper at the edges. Isaiah felt it, the change in air, the way attention can weigh more than silence. He did not turn. He watched the building instead. A woman stepped forward, her voice loud enough to carry. She asked if he was lost, if he was waiting for someone who worked there. The words were framed as concern, but the smiles behind them told a different story. Others joined in, offering suggestions about shelters, about side streets where people like him might belong. Each comment landed lightly, as if tossed, yet together they formed a pile. Isaiah met their eyes then. His expression was neutral, his posture relaxed. He answered politely, said he was early for an appointment. His voice was steady, warm even. This seemed to amuse them more. A man with a watch that caught the sun laughed and said, "Appointments here were for people with access cards, not for those passing through." Isaiah nodded, as if considering this useful information. He thanked them. He stepped closer to the fountain, letting the mist touch his face. Inside, he felt a familiar tightening, not of anger, but of memory. He had stood in places like this before, in lobbies and classrooms, in lines and interviews, always aware of how quickly assumptions formed. He had learned to let them pass through him without taking root. He thought of his mother, who had worked double shifts at a hospital, and taught him that dignity was not granted by others, but maintained by oneself. He thought of his father, who had once told him that silence could be a tool, that timing mattered more than volume. Those lessons had carried him through college, through the early years of Orion, when it had been a cramped office with borrowed desks and a single printer that jammed every afternoon. Back then, Isaiah had been everywhere and nowhere. He had coded through nights, pitched to skeptical investors, cleaned up after meetings when the cleaning crew did not show. When success came, it arrived quietly at first, then all at once. The company grew, absorbed competitors, reshaped markets. Isaiah stepped back from the spotlight as it expanded, appointing public faces, cultivating mystery. It had been easier to lead from the shadows, to see without being seen. Now, years later, he stood in front of the monument that success had built, watching a group of his own employees weigh him and find him wanting. The irony did not escape him. He felt no urge to correct them. Not yet. A security guard approached, glancing between Isaiah and the group. The guard asked if there was a problem. The woman waved a hand and said there was no problem, just someone lingering. The guard looked at Isaiah with a practiced neutrality. Isaiah smiled and said he would wait over there, gesturing to a bench beneath a leafless tree. As he sat, he pulled a notebook from his bag and wrote a few lines. He wrote not names but impressions, tones, small details. He had always believed that leadership required attention to the smallest currents. Patterns revealed themselves over time. The plaza filled further. More employees arrived, some joining the earlier group, others keeping to themselves. Conversations overlapped. A few glances drifted Isaiah's way, followed by whispers. He did not look up. He let the scene unfold. A young man broke from the crowd and approached him hesitantly. He asked if Isaiah was okay, if he needed help finding a place. There was no edge in his voice, only uncertainty. Isaiah thanked him and said he was fine. The young man nodded and returned to his group, where he was met with raised brows and quiet jokes. Isaiah closed his notebook. He felt a swell of tenderness for the young man, for the version of himself that had once sought approval in similar circles. He also felt a growing resolve. This was not about a single morning or a handful of careless remarks. It was about culture, about what was allowed to breathe within the walls of a company that claimed innovation and integrity. The rotating doors opened, and the first wave of employees moved inside. The group that had mocked Isaiah lingered, still amused, still confident in their place. One of them pointed at Isaiah and said something that made the others laugh again. Isaiah stood, adjusted his coat, and walked toward the doors as well. A hand shot out, blocking his path. The man with the shining watch told him the event was for staff only. Isaiah met his gaze. He said he understood and asked if the man could check with the front desk. The man scoffed and said there was no need. Isaiah stepped back, not in retreat, but in patience. He glanced at his watch, a simple piece that did not reveal its worth. Time moved forward. The doors continued to turn. Inside the building, preparations were underway for a leadership briefing scheduled later that morning. Executives gathered, unaware that the man they would soon answer to had already been weighed and dismissed outside. The contrast hung in the air, unseen but present. Isaiah returned to the bench. He sat with his hands folded, breathing evenly. Fear brushed against him, not for himself, but for what he might find when he chose to lift the veil. Shame was present too, not his own, but anticipated, a shadow cast by the truth yet to come. He did not rush it. The sun climbed higher. The plaza warmed. Conversations shifted to weekend plans. Isaiah waited, calm as stone, carrying within him the knowledge of who he was and the certainty of what he would soon set in motion. The day had only begun, and the first quiet notes of a larger reckoning were already sounding, unheard by those who would soon be forced to listen. By mid-morning, the plaza had thinned, but the tension that had gathered there traveled indoors, carried on coats and conversations. Isaiah passed through the doors at last, not by force or explanation, but by timing. A different security guard rotated in, one who glanced at the temporary badge Isaiah produced and waved him through without comment. The badge bore a visitor designation and a name he had used before, a modest alias that never drew attention. He felt the eyes on his back as he entered, the whispers trailing him like a faint draft. The lobby smelled of polished stone and citrus cleaner. Screens along the walls played a looping video celebrating Orion Systems milestones, faces smiling beneath headlines. Isaiah paused before one screen, watching the company history scroll past. His own face did not appear by design. He had chosen this invisibility long ago, believing it would free the company from personality and allow it to focus on work. Today, that choice pressed on him in a new way. He crossed the lobby toward a bank of elevators reserved for staff. A receptionist intercepted him with a tight smile and asked where he was headed. Isaiah answered calmly, naming a conference room on the 32nd floor. The receptionist hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard, then said visitors needed an escort. Isaiah nodded and said he would wait. He stepped aside, standing beneath a banner about inclusion and excellence. Minutes passed. Employees moved around him, some glancing, some pretending not to. The group from the plaza appeared again, their laughter echoing off the high ceiling. The man with the shining watch pointed Isaiah out to a colleague, shaking his head. They took the staff elevators without another look. An assistant arrived at last, apologetic, explaining there had been a mix-up. She offered to escort Isaiah. As they rode up, she made small talk about the volunteer event, about how busy the building was. She asked Isaiah what he did. He answered with a general description that revealed nothing specific. She nodded, clearly slotting him into a category that required no further thought. On the 32nd floor, glass walls revealed a long corridor of meeting rooms. Voices overlapped behind closed doors. Isaiah thanked the assistant and said he could find his way. She seemed relieved and left quickly. He walked the corridor slowly, listening. In one room, managers discussed targets and timelines. In another, a heated debate over budgets spilled into the hall when the door opened. Isaiah stopped near a window that overlooked the city. From this height, the streets looked orderly, almost gentle. He wondered how many stories were unfolding below, unseen. A familiar voice rose behind him. It belonged to a senior director, someone Isaiah had appointed himself. The director was speaking to a small group, recounting the morning's events outside with humor sharpened by confidence. He described a man who had lingered near the building, how the group had handled it. Laughter followed. The director's eyes flicked toward Isaiah, then away, as if he had not connected the story to the person standing nearby. Isaiah felt a tightening again, deeper this time. Not anger alone, but a sense of fracture. These were not strangers on a street. These were stewards of a culture he had built. He stepped closer, and the director noticed him at last. The director asked if Isaiah needed something. The question carried impatience. Isaiah said he was waiting for a meeting. The director asked which one. Isaiah gave the same room name as before. The director frowned and said that room was reserved for leadership. Isaiah replied that he was aware. The group fell quiet. The director suggested Isaiah move along, said there were other floors for visitors. Isaiah thanked him for the guidance and did not move. The director's jaw tightened. He gestured to a colleague to call security. As they waited, the director continued speaking, perhaps to reassert control. He talked about standards, about protecting the company's image. His words floated around Isaiah, familiar phrases that sounded different when aimed at him. Isaiah listened, noting how easily language shifted to justify exclusion. Security arrived, the same guard from the plaza earlier. Recognition flickered across the guard's face. The director explained the situation briskly. The guard asked Isaiah for identification. Isaiah handed over the visitor badge and an ID card with his alias. The guard examined them, then asked where Isaiah was headed. Isaiah answered calmly. The guard hesitated, uncertain. The director scoffed and said there was no meeting. Isaiah looked at the guard and said he was early. The guard nodded, caught between authority and procedure. He suggested Isaiah wait in a lounge area down the hall. Isaiah agreed. The lounge was quiet, furnished with low chairs and a coffee machine. Isaiah sat and poured himself a cup. His hands were steady. Inside, however, a plan was forming, not in sharp lines but in layers. He did not want a spectacle. He wanted clarity. He pulled out his phone and checked messages. There were several from members of the board, confirming the afternoon briefing. There were also notes from a compliance officer about employee complaints that had been quietly filed and quietly dismissed. Isaiah read them carefully. Patterns emerged. A woman entered the lounge, someone Isaiah recognized as a project lead. She stopped short when she saw him. She asked if he was lost. Isaiah smiled and said he was waiting. She glanced around, then sat across from him, curiosity overtaking caution. She asked his name. He gave the alias. She asked what brought him to Orion. He said he had always been interested in how organizations treated people when they believed no one important was watching. She laughed lightly, assuming it was a joke. She talked about her team, about pressures, about how some people did not fit. Isaiah listened and asked questions that prompted longer answers. By the time she left, she seemed thoughtful, unsettled in a way she could not name. Word spread that a visitor was lingering on the leadership floor. The group from earlier passed by the lounge, peering in. The man with the watch made a show of checking his time and shaking his head. Someone suggested loudly that security should be firmer. Isaiah met their eyes and nodded politely. At noon, a catering crew arrived, setting up trays for the afternoon briefing. The smell of food filled the corridor. Isaiah stood and helped a worker lift a heavy box. The worker thanked him, surprised. They exchanged a few words about the weather, about the city. The simplicity of the exchange felt grounding. The director returned, flanked by another executive. They confronted Isaiah again, this time with smiles that did not reach their eyes. They said they had checked the schedule. There was no meeting for him. Isaiah said he understood and asked if the board was still meeting at 2. The executive blinked, thrown by the question. He asked how Isaiah knew about the board meeting. Isaiah said he paid attention. Their conversation drew attention. A few employees slowed, listening. The director's voice sharpened. He said Isaiah was being disruptive. Isaiah replied that he was waiting quietly. The executive suggested they call corporate security. As they argued, a woman stepped out of a nearby office, someone whose presence shifted the energy immediately. She was a senior counsel, respected and cautious. She asked what was happening. The director explained. The counsel looked at Isaiah, then at the director, then back again. She asked Isaiah his name. He gave the alias. She asked for his invitation. Isaiah said he did not have one. The counsel sighed and suggested they move the conversation to a private room. Isaiah agreed. Inside, the air felt closer. The counsel asked direct questions. Isaiah answered honestly but incompletely. He said he had concerns about how people were treated within the company. He said he was observing. The director laughed, dismissive. He said Orion had processes. The council looked at Isaiah thoughtfully. She asked why today. Isaiah said because sometimes it took seeing behavior firsthand to understand reports. The council asked him to leave the floor. Isaiah said he would, after the briefing. The director protested. The council held up a hand, thinking. She asked Isaiah to wait in the lounge and promised to revisit the issue after lunch. Isaiah returned to the lounge. He sat and watched employees pass, each carrying their own assumptions. Fear brushed him again, a sense of the scale of what he was about to challenge. Shame hovered, not his, but the kind that arrives when mirrors are lifted. He thought of ambition, of the drive that had built Orion, and how easily it could eclipse care. At 1:30, the leadership team began to gather. Familiar faces appeared, some nodding at Isaiah without recognition, others avoiding his gaze. The group from the plaza took their seats in the conference room, confident, joking. Isaiah remained in the lounge, the coin in his pocket warming under his thumb. He knew the next steps would require precision. He would not raise his voice. He would let truth do the work. The conflict was no longer confined to whispers and glances. It had moved into the structure of the day, into schedules and rooms. As the clock crept toward 2, the company's routine pressed against a hidden fault line, and Isaiah waited at its edge, ready to step forward, but not yet revealing the ground beneath. The conference room doors closed with a muted click, sealing the leadership team inside. Through the glass walls, Isaiah could see silhouettes settling into seats, folders opening, screens lighting up. The company moved into its practiced rhythm, unaware that an unplanned current now ran beneath it. Isaiah remained in the lounge, but he did not stay still. He stood, stretched his shoulders, and walked slowly down the corridor, stopping at a wall-mounted directory. He traced the list of departments with his eyes, lingering on names he recognized and others he did not. Each represented decisions made far from public view, decisions that shaped daily experiences. He took out his notebook again and wrote. A facilities manager approached, clipboard tucked under her arm. She asked if Isaiah needed assistance. He thanked her and asked about accessibility issues on upper floors. She answered readily, grateful for a question she could solve. Their conversation drew the attention of a nearby employee, who chimed in with a complaint about broken equipment. Isaiah listened, asked who handled repairs, asked how long issues typically lingered. The manager shrugged, said priorities shifted depending on who complained. When the manager left, the employee lingered. He asked Isaiah if he was consulting. Isaiah smiled and said he was observing. The employee laughed, thinking it clever, then grew thoughtful. He spoke quietly about feeling unseen, about how some voices carried farther than others. Isaiah nodded, offered no promises, only attention. Down the hall, the leadership briefing began. Slides advanced, numbers rose and fell, strategies were debated. Inside the room, confidence ruled. Outside, Isaiah moved like a shadow, gathering fragments. He passed an open office where 2 junior analysts spoke in hushed tones. They fell silent when they noticed him, then relaxed when he kept walking. A few steps later, he heard his alias spoken by someone he had not met. He paused. The voice belonged to the assistant who had escorted him earlier. She was speaking to another assistant, wondering why a visitor had been allowed on the floor. Isaiah continued on, the words settling without sting. At a coffee station, he encountered the young man from the plaza. The young man looked startled, then relieved. He asked if Isaiah had found his meeting. Isaiah said he was waiting for the right moment. The young man laughed nervously and offered coffee. They stood side by side, the machine whirring between them. The young man spoke about his role, about how proud he had been to get hired, about the pressure to fit in. He admitted he had laughed earlier, not because he found it funny, but because it seemed expected. His shoulders sagged as he said it. Isaiah thanked him for the honesty. He said expectations could be powerful, but they were not immutable. The young man nodded, eyes down, then looked up with a question he did not ask. Isaiah returned to the lounge just as a notification buzzed on his phone. It was from the senior counsel, asking to speak briefly. He replied that he was available. Minutes later, she arrived, closing the door behind her. She asked Isaiah directly what he wanted. He considered the question carefully. He said he wanted to understand whether Orion lived up to its stated values when no cameras were present. He said he wanted to know how leaders responded when confronted with discomfort. The counsel folded her arms, studying him. She asked again who he was. Isaiah said that would become clear. She warned him that provoking senior staff could have consequences. Isaiah acknowledged this. He said consequences were already present. They were simply unevenly distributed. The counsel sighed, a sound of fatigue rather than irritation. She said she would observe. She asked him to be careful. Isaiah thanked her. As she left, Isaiah felt the scale of the moment expand. This was no longer a private test. Others were beginning to sense the disturbance. Inside the conference room, the director with the shining watch delivered a segment on operational efficiency. His voice carried through the glass when he grew animated. He spoke about accountability, about maintaining standards. Isaiah watched, noting the contrast between rhetoric and behavior. He did not interrupt. When the briefing broke for a short recess, leaders spilled into the corridor. Some headed for restrooms, others for coffee. The director noticed Isaiah immediately. He approached with a forced smile and asked if Isaiah was still there. Isaiah said yes. The director suggested again that Isaiah leave. Isaiah asked if the director had time to hear an observation. The director scoffed and said he was busy. Another executive, older and quieter, paused nearby. He asked what was going on. The director dismissed it. Isaiah met the older executive's eyes and said he had a question about employee morale. The older executive hesitated, then said they could talk later. He gave Isaiah a card. The director pulled the older executive aside, speaking in a low, urgent tone. Isaiah stepped away, giving them space. He felt a familiar mix of protectiveness and resolve. The people moving through this space mattered, even when they failed themselves. Isaiah checked his phone again. A message from the board chair confirmed that the final agenda item would include a culture review. Isaiah smiled faintly. Timing, as his father had said, mattered. He took the elevator down to a mid-level floor, one he rarely visited even when fully visible. The atmosphere there was different. Cubicles replaced glass offices. The hum of work was constant. Isaiah walked the aisles slowly, drawing curious glances. A team lead approached, asking if he needed help. Isaiah said he was learning how information flowed between teams. The team lead launched into an explanation of bottlenecks and pressures. Others joined in, adding their perspectives. Complaints surfaced cautiously, then more freely. Isaiah asked who felt heard and who did not. Silence followed. Then someone laughed, uneasy. A woman spoke up, saying feedback traveled upward only when it aligned with existing plans. Isaiah thanked them and moved on. He did not promise change. He promised attention. The distinction mattered. Back upstairs, the second half of the briefing resumed. Isaiah returned to the lounge. The catering trays were half empty now. He poured water and sat. The coin warmed again under his thumb. A message arrived from the compliance officer, attaching a report Isaiah had requested months earlier. He read it slowly. The language was cautious, findings softened by qualifiers. Isaiah noted what was missing as much as what was present. Footsteps approached. The project lead from earlier entered the lounge. She sat without asking. She said she had been thinking about their conversation. She said it bothered her that she had assumed things about him. Isaiah listened. She asked what he did when assumptions threatened to harden into habits. Isaiah said he examined systems rather than individuals. Habits were often protected by structure. She nodded, absorbing this. She asked if he was some kind of auditor. Isaiah smiled and said labels could wait. In the corridor, voices rose. The director was arguing with the senior counsel. Their words carried fragments: disruption, liability, image. Isaiah did not move. The counsel's voice remained measured. She said they needed facts. The argument ended abruptly when the board chair emerged from the conference room. Conversations stilled. The chair spoke briefly with the counsel, then glanced toward the lounge. Their eyes met. Recognition sparked, brief but unmistakable. The chair gave a small nod and returned to the room. Isaiah's pulse quickened, though his expression did not change. The window of concealment was narrowing. He welcomed it. The young man from the plaza returned, standing awkwardly at the lounge entrance. He said the director had asked about Isaiah. Isaiah thanked him for the message. The young man hesitated, then apologized for earlier. Isaiah accepted without ceremony. He said growth often began with discomfort. As the afternoon wore on, tension spread. Emails flew, meetings were rescheduled. The presence of an unnamed observer unsettled routines. Some employees grew defensive, others reflective. Isaiah watched it all, noting who closed ranks and who opened doors. He took the elevator to the executive floor again, as the briefing neared its end. This time, no one stopped him. The corridors felt tighter, charged with anticipation. He stood near the conference room doors, listening as final remarks were made inside. The director spoke again, emphasizing unity. The older executive followed, urging listening. The board chair concluded with a reminder that numbers were not the only measure of success. A pause followed, heavy with implication. The doors opened. Leaders filed out, expressions mixed. Some saw Isaiah and froze. Others nodded stiffly. The director's face tightened. The board chair approached Isaiah and greeted him by his true name, quietly. Nearby conversations faltered. Heads turned. A few people looked confused. Others alarmed. Isaiah returned the greeting with a calm smile. The director laughed, uncertain, and asked what was going on. The board chair said they would address it shortly. He asked Isaiah if he was ready. Isaiah said yes, but not yet. They moved toward a smaller conference room. The senior counsel joined them. The director followed, insisting on answers. The board chair asked him to wait. The director bristled, but complied. Inside the smaller room, The board chair asked Isaiah what he had seen. Isaiah summarized without embellishment. He spoke of moments, patterns, language. He spoke of how power revealed itself in small interactions. The council listened intently, taking notes. The board chair asked what Isaiah wanted to do next. Isaiah said he wanted the company to see itself clearly. He wanted accountability that matched authority. He wanted to protect those who had spoken honestly. The board chair nodded. He said the full leadership team would reconvene. He asked Isaiah if he would speak. Isaiah said he would, but he would not perform. He would state facts. Outside the room, word spread quickly now. Whispers turned into urgent murmurs. The director paced, making calls. The project lead watched from a distance, her expression troubled. The young man stood near the elevators, wringing his hands. Isaiah returned to the lounge one last time. He sat, breathing evenly. Fear brushed him again, sharper now, joined by a sense of responsibility that felt almost heavy. Shame hovered, ready to land where it belonged. He thought of justice, not as spectacle, but as correction. His phone buzzed with a final message from the board chair. 10 minutes. Isaiah stood, smoothing his coat. The coin slipped back into his pocket. As he walked toward the conference room, employees parted instinctively, sensing the shift even if they did not yet understand it. The building seemed to hold its breath, routines suspended on the edge of revelation. Isaiah stepped forward, still unnamed to most, carrying with him the weight of truth and the certainty that the next moments would change the shape of the company, though the reckoning itself had not yet begun. The conference room filled more slowly than usual, as if each person felt the weight of the threshold they were crossing. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Tablets and notebooks were set down with care. Conversations did not rise. They hovered and then fell away. The glass walls reflected faces that seemed slightly unfamiliar to their owners. Isaiah stood near the far end of the room, hands relaxed at his sides. He watched people take their seats, noting who avoided looking at him and who tried, unsuccessfully, to read him. The board chair entered last and closed the door. The sound landed with a finality that drew every eye forward. The board chair did not sit immediately. He cleared his throat and thanked everyone for adjusting schedules. He said there had been developments that required attention. His gaze moved deliberately to Isaiah. A few heads turned, then more. The director with the shining watch frowned, confused irritation creeping across his face. The board chair introduced Isaiah by name, stating his role without flourish. The words did not echo, yet they seemed to press outward, filling the room for a moment. No one spoke. A breath released somewhere. A chair creaked as someone shifted. Isaiah felt the room change, not explosively, but like a tide turning. He saw recognition bloom in some faces and disbelief in others. The director's mouth opened, then closed. The project lead's eyes widened. The young man from the plaza, seated near the back, stared at the table. The board chair invited Isaiah to speak. Isaiah stepped forward, not to the head of the table but to a place beside it. He thanked everyone for being present. His voice was even, measured, carrying without effort. He said he had spent the day observing. He said he had chosen not to announce himself because he wanted to see the company as it saw itself when it believed authority was elsewhere. He paused, letting that settle. The director leaned forward, protesting that this was irregular. Isaiah acknowledged that it was. He said growth often required irregularity. The board chair gestured for the director to hold. Isaiah continued. He spoke of the plaza in the morning, of assumptions made quickly and defended casually. He spoke of language that disguised exclusion as efficiency. He spoke of how easily dignity could be withheld without anyone believing they had done harm. He did not name individuals. He described moments. As he spoke, faces flushed. Some people nodded slowly, recognizing themselves in fragments. Others crossed their arms. The director interrupted again, saying this was unfair, that no one knew who Isaiah was. Isaiah agreed. He said that was the point. A murmur ran around the table. The senior counsel watched closely, pen moving. Isaiah said he had also seen kindness. He mentioned the facilities manager, the catering worker, the employee who had spoken about feeling unseen. He said the company contained both care and carelessness, and that leadership decided which one multiplied. The board chair asked Isaiah to address the allegations of disruption. Isaiah said he had remained where he was asked to wait, had followed procedures as they were explained to him, and had been redirected repeatedly without cause. He said the disruption arose not from his presence, but from discomfort with uncertainty. The director laughed sharply and said this was a trap. Isaiah met his gaze. He said traps relied on deception. This relied on observation. Another executive spoke, asking why Isaiah had not simply addressed concerns through channels. Isaiah replied that channels often filtered what challenged comfort. He said he had reviewed reports that never reached this room in full. He signaled to the board chair, who nodded to the senior counsel. She summarized patterns found in internal complaints, careful with language but clear in implication. She said many issues aligned with what Isaiah had witnessed in a single day. The room grew still. Screens dimmed as attention shifted entirely to the people present. Isaiah said he was not interested in punishment for its own sake. He was interested in alignment. He asked leaders to consider how their words traveled downward, how jokes and dismissals hardened into norms. The project lead raised her hand hesitantly. She said she wanted to speak. She admitted she had made assumptions about Isaiah earlier, that she had not questioned why. She said hearing it framed this way made her uncomfortable, but she believed discomfort could be useful. A few people nodded. The director scoffed and said this was performative regret. The board chair warned him to choose words carefully. The director bristled, saying he had built teams, delivered results. Isaiah acknowledged his results. He asked whether results excused harm. The director said harm was subjective. Isaiah replied that patterns were not. A senior vice president spoke up, quieter than usual. He said he had witnessed similar moments, but had not intervened. He said he had told himself it was not his place. Isaiah thanked him for the honesty. He said leadership expanded the definition of place. As the discussion unfolded, the room divided not into sides but into currents. Some leaned forward, engaged, grappling. Others retreated behind crossed arms and fixed expressions. Isaiah did not push. He allowed silence to do some of the work. The board chair asked Isaiah what he proposed next. Isaiah said, transparency. He said the company would conduct a comprehensive review of leadership behavior, facilitated externally, with protections for those who spoke. He said authority would be examined alongside outcomes. The director objected loudly, saying this would damage morale. Isaiah replied that morale built on silence was already damaged. The board chair asked the director to step outside briefly. The director stood, incredulous, and looked around as if expecting support. None came. He left, the door closing behind him. The sound lingered. Isaiah addressed the room again. He said accountability was not exile but correction. He said some people would resist because they believed proximity to power equaled immunity. He said that belief was incompatible with the company's stated values. The young man from the plaza spoke next, voice shaking. He apologized publicly for laughing earlier, for choosing ease over integrity. He said he did not want to build a career on that foundation. Isaiah thanked him and said courage often arrived after missteps. A few people wiped their eyes. Others stared at the table. The board chair announced a short recess. People stood slowly, conversations low and urgent. Isaiah remained by the window, looking out at the city. From here, the river caught the afternoon light. The senior counsel joined him. She said the room was divided but listening. She warned that resistance would harden. Isaiah said he expected it. The door opened abruptly. The director returned, face tight. He demanded to know what was being decided without him. The board chair said decisions were being prepared, not finalized. The director accused Isaiah of ambush. Isaiah turned to him fully for the first time. He said ambush required concealment with intent to harm. He said he had concealed to reveal. The director said Isaiah was dismantling trust. Isaiah replied that trust dismantled itself when dignity was optional. The exchange drew others closer. The room filled again, the recess forgotten. The board chair asked everyone to sit. He said they would continue. Isaiah spoke again, this time more personally. He said he had built Orion from a place of scarcity, where collaboration was survival. He said he had stepped back from visibility to let others lead, trusting that values would persist. He said trust required verification. He did not raise his voice. The effect was stronger for it. The director said Isaiah was questioning his character. Isaiah said he was questioning his actions. The board chair outlined immediate steps. Temporary suspension of certain decision-making authorities pending review. Names were not read aloud, but eyes moved. The director stiffened. The project lead asked what this meant for teams. The board chair said stability would be maintained, but leadership roles might shift. Isaiah added that protection for those who had spoken would be explicit. A murmur of relief passed through some seats. The director stood again, saying this was unacceptable. The board chair said the board had the authority. The director demanded a vote. The board chair said the vote would come after findings. Isaiah watched the director closely. He felt no triumph, only a steady resolve. This was not about winning. The director accused Isaiah of betrayal. Isaiah said betrayal occurred when responsibility was abandoned. Silence followed, heavier than before. The board chair called for order. He said this conversation would continue into the evening. He asked Isaiah to remain available. Isaiah agreed. As the meeting stretched on, more voices joined, some halting, some firm. Stories surfaced of meetings cut short, of ideas dismissed, of jokes that stung long after they were uttered. Not all aligned perfectly, but together they formed a pattern. Isaiah listened, occasionally asking clarifying questions. He did not defend himself. He did not accuse beyond what was necessary. The director's posture grew rigid. He spoke less, eyes darting. The shine of his watch seemed suddenly out of place. Outside the room, employees gathered, sensing something seismic. Messages buzzed across devices. The building felt charged, as if holding an electrical current. As late afternoon light slanted through the windows, the board chair suggested a pause before proceeding to formal actions. He said they would reconvene shortly with a clearer framework. Isaiah nodded. He stepped back toward the window again, breathing evenly. The first layer of truth had been laid bare, but the structure beneath it was still exposed, awaiting the next strike of clarity. Behind him, the room hummed with unsettled energy. No one spoke of endings. Everyone sensed that this was only the opening of a reckoning that would demand more before it could move forward. When the meeting resumed, the air felt denser, as if the room had absorbed every word spoken earlier and now released them back as pressure. Chairs were pulled closer to the table. Devices were set aside. The board chair remained standing, signaling that the next phase would not be procedural alone. Isaiah stayed where he was, near the window, his reflection faint in the glass. He watched the faces as they returned, noticing how some avoided his eyes while others sought them. The director with the shining watch took his seat stiffly, jaw set, hands clasped as if holding something in place. The board chair began by outlining the scope of the immediate review. He spoke slowly, ensuring clarity. External investigators would be retained. Decision authority in several divisions would be temporarily reassigned. Performance metrics would be expanded to include behavioral leadership indicators. Each sentence landed with a measurable shift in posture around the table. The director interrupted, demanding to know which divisions. The board chair said that would be communicated individually after the meeting. The director pressed, accusing the board of secrecy. Isaiah listened, noting how quickly frustration turned outward when control slipped. Isaiah stepped forward, just enough to be clearly present. He said transparency was not the same as immediacy. He said responsible process required care. The director scoffed, saying care was being weaponized. Isaiah replied that care without accountability was indulgence, but accountability without care was damage. A murmur moved through the room, not agreement or dissent, but recognition of a truth that complicated things. The senior counsel distributed a brief document outlining protections for employees who participated in the review. She emphasized confidentiality and non-retaliation. As pages turned, several leaders exchanged glances. Isaiah noted who read carefully and who skimmed. A vice president asked what would happen if findings contradicted long-held perceptions of certain leaders. The board chair said then perceptions would have to change. Isaiah added that longevity was not immunity. The director leaned back, crossing his arms. He said results spoke for themselves. Isaiah asked if results spoke for those who had stopped speaking. Silence followed, heavy and uneven. The project lead spoke again, this time more firmly. She said the review scared her, but she welcomed it. She said she had benefited from proximity to power without questioning its cost. Her voice steadied as she spoke. She said she wanted to do better. Isaiah inclined his head, acknowledging the risk inherent in that admission. The older executive nodded slowly. He said he had seen talent leave quietly over the years. He said he had told himself it was inevitable. He admitted now that inevitability had been convenient. Isaiah thanked him. He said convenience was often the quiet partner of harm. The board chair asked Isaiah to describe how he would measure progress. Isaiah said progress would show in who felt safe to disagree, in who was interrupted and who was heard, in whether humor traveled downward without punching. He said metrics mattered, but attention mattered more. The director laughed without humor, saying this was subjective. Isaiah replied that subjectivity did not absolve responsibility. He said leaders were trusted to make judgment calls daily. They could not retreat from judgment when it reflected poorly. The board chair called for a short pause to allow the council to confer with him privately. Isaiah stepped back again, giving space. The director watched him closely now, something like fear flickering beneath defiance. Outside the room, the corridor had filled with quiet clusters of employees. Word had spread enough to unsettle routines. Some speculated, others waited. The young man from the plaza stood with a small group, speaking in low tones. The facilities manager leaned against a wall, arms folded, listening. Inside, the council and board chair returned to the table. The board chair announced that effective immediately, several leaders would be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the review. Names would be communicated directly after the meeting. The director half stood, then sat again, face draining of color. He demanded to know if this applied to him. The board chair said that would be addressed shortly. The director accused the board of cowardice. Isaiah looked at him and said courage did not require spectacle. The director pointed at Isaiah, voice rising. He said Isaiah had orchestrated this, that he had manipulated people. Isaiah replied calmly that he had simply been present. He said behavior did not require orchestration. The director's voice cracked as he insisted his intentions had been misunderstood. Isaiah acknowledged that intentions could be sincere and still cause damage. He said leadership required curiosity about impact. The room shifted again, tension cresting. The board chair asked everyone to lower their voices. He said the purpose here was not argument, but alignment. A senior manager spoke from the far end of the table, someone rarely vocal. She said she had avoided speaking before because she did not trust the room. She said she trusted it now, not because it was safe, but because silence felt riskier. She described meetings where her ideas were taken up only after being restated by others. She described laughter that followed her objections. Her hands trembled as she spoke. Isaiah watched the director's reaction. The man stared at the table, jaw clenched. Others shifted uncomfortably. The board chair thanked the manager. He asked if others wished to speak. Several did, cautiously at first, then with growing clarity. Stories overlapped, not identical, but resonant. The room filled with the sound of people naming what they had once swallowed. Isaiah felt a protective instinct rise, not toward the institution, but toward the individuals taking these risks. He spoke only to clarify timelines, to ask who was present, to connect threads. He did not editorialize. At one point, the director stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. He said this was a trial without rules. The board chair said rules were being established. The director said he refused to be humiliated. Isaiah said accountability was not humiliation, unless dignity had been tied to dominance. The director's face flushed. He accused Isaiah of revenge. Isaiah paused before answering. He said revenge sought suffering. He sought correction. He said if suffering followed, it would be a byproduct of choices, not his aim. The board chair asked the director to step outside again. This time, 2 members of security appeared at the door, summoned quietly. The director looked around, searching for allies. None spoke. He left, shoulders rigid. The door closed, and a collective breath released. The board chair addressed the room with measured authority. He said leadership would be restructured temporarily. He said interim leads would be appointed with clear behavioral expectations. He said this process would be communicated company-wide before the end of the day. Isaiah added that communication mattered as much as action. He said the message should acknowledge harm without defensiveness. He said listening sessions would follow. A vice president asked who would lead those sessions. Isaiah said trained facilitators, not the people whose behavior was under review. The vice president nodded, relieved. Time stretched. The afternoon light shifted, lengthening shadows across the table. The room felt worn, but not emptied. The board chair finally announced that the director would be placed on administrative leave effective immediately. The words were simple, formal. A few people exhaled sharply. Others looked down. Isaiah felt no satisfaction, only a sober acknowledgement. This was necessary, but it was not sufficient. The project lead whispered something to the woman beside her, then raised her hand. She asked what would happen if the review confirmed patterns at multiple levels. The board chair said then multiple levels would be addressed. Isaiah added that culture did not reside in a single role. Outside, the corridor buzzed as news began to circulate. Phones lit up. Messages flew. The building's usual hum took on a different pitch. The board chair called for a brief recess before drafting the formal announcement. People stood slowly, some stretching stiff backs, others remaining seated, lost in thought. Isaiah stepped into the corridor. Conversations hushed as he passed. The young man from the plaza approached him, eyes wide. He asked if the director was really leaving. Isaiah said the process was beginning. The young man nodded, absorbing this. The facilities manager thanked Isaiah quietly for listening earlier. Isaiah thanked her for speaking. Their exchange was brief, grounded. The senior counsel joined Isaiah near the elevators. She said the backlash would come quickly. Isaiah said he expected it. She asked if he was prepared. Isaiah said preparation did not eliminate cost, but it clarified purpose. They returned to the room. Draft language for the announcement appeared on the screen. The board chair read it aloud. Isaiah suggested changes, softening defensive phrasing, strengthening commitments. The council adjusted the text accordingly. A debate arose over how explicit to be about leadership changes. Some argued for caution. Isaiah argued for clarity. He said ambiguity protected those with power at the expense of those without. The board chair sided with clarity. As edits continued, the director's absence loomed large. His chair remained empty, a visual reminder of how quickly certainty could dissolve. The announcement was finalized. The board chair scheduled its release. He said a town hall would follow the next day. He asked Isaiah to attend. Isaiah agreed. The meeting adjourned without ceremony. People filed out slowly, carrying the weight of what had occurred and what was still to come. Isaiah lingered, alone for a moment. He looked around the room where so many decisions had been made, where voices had risen and fallen. He felt the edge of exhaustion, tempered by resolve. Outside, evening approached. The city beyond the glass continued its rhythm, indifferent and enduring. Isaiah gathered his notebook and headed toward the elevators. The building felt changed, not healed, but altered. The reckoning was underway, and the next phase would demand more than declarations. As the doors closed and the elevator descended, Isaiah steadied his breath. The structure had shifted, but the deeper work lay ahead. What followed would test not only authority, but endurance, as the company moved toward the next, more difficult confrontation that still waited beyond this moment. Night settled over the city with a quiet insistence. the kind that did not announce itself but rearranged everything in subtle ways. Lights flickered on across the skyline, windows becoming constellations. Inside Orion Systems, the building remained awake, its usual evening hush replaced by a low, restless energy that moved from floor to floor. Isaiah stood alone in an executive office he had not occupied in years. The furniture was new, chosen by others, but the view was the same. The river reflected the lights below, broken and rejoined by current. He rested his hands on the back of a chair, feeling the smoothness of the wood, grounding himself. The announcement had been released. Phones across the company vibrated nearly in unison. Messages flooded inboxes, carefully worded but unmistakable. Leadership changes, independent review, listening sessions, commitments stated plainly, without apology and without triumph. Isaiah read the internal responses as they arrived. Some were brief notes of relief. Others were long, careful messages that circled fear before naming it. A few were defensive, questioning motives and methods. He did not respond yet. This moment required space more than answers. A knock came at the door. The senior counsel entered, closing it behind her. She looked tired but alert. She said the director had cleared his office under supervision and left the building. She said security had handled it professionally. Isaiah nodded. He asked if there had been resistance. She said words, not actions. She asked Isaiah how he was holding up. He considered the question. He said he felt the weight of what had begun, not what had ended. She nodded, understanding. They spoke briefly about logistics. Press inquiries would come by morning. The board chair was preparing a statement. Isaiah said he would not speak to media yet. He said the company needed to speak to itself first. When the council left, Isaiah sat. He allowed himself a moment to feel the accumulation of the day. Fear surfaced again, quieter now but persistent. Not fear of loss, but fear of fracture, of unintended harm rippling outward. He reminded himself that repair required exposure. Elsewhere in the building, small groups gathered. In break rooms and quiet corners, employees compared notes. The young man from the plaza sat with colleagues, rereading the announcement. He said little, listening more than he spoke. When someone joked nervously, he did not laugh. The silence that followed felt different from the one that had come before. On a mid-level floor, the facilities manager finished her shift later than usual. She paused by a window, phone in hand, rereading a message thanking staff for their patience. She thought of her conversation with Isaiah and felt a cautious sense of being seen. The project lead returned to her office and closed the door. She stared at the wall for a long moment, then opened her laptop and began drafting a message to her team. She erased and rewrote the first paragraph several times before settling on words that acknowledged uncertainty without hiding behind it. Isaiah's phone buzzed again. This time it was the board chair, asking him to join a late call. Isaiah agreed. On the call, board members spoke candidly. Some expressed concern about investor reaction. Others emphasized the necessity of action. Isaiah listened, intervening only when discussion drifted toward dilution. He said consistency would matter more than reassurance. He said people would test the company's resolve not with words, but with time. One board member asked Isaiah if he had anticipated the scale of reaction. Isaiah said he had anticipated resistance, not resonance. He said the resonance came from a hunger that had gone unaddressed. The call ended with plans for the next day. Isaiah stood again, stretching his shoulders. The building felt quieter now, but not at rest. He decided to walk. He left the office and took the stairs down several floors, passing through spaces that told stories in their layout and wear. Conference rooms where arguments had calcified. Hallways where jokes had traveled unchecked. He imagined them differently, not transformed yet, but questioned. On one floor, he encountered the older executive sitting alone at a desk, lights dimmed. The man looked up, surprised, then relieved. He said he had stayed to think. Isaiah sat across from him. The executive admitted he felt complicit. He said he had known when to look away and had done so too often. Isaiah listened without absolving. He said responsibility did not end with recognition. The executive nodded. He asked what came next. Isaiah said action, sustained and uncomfortable. They parted quietly. Near the elevators, Isaiah encountered the project lead again. She asked if she could speak with him. He agreed. She said she feared losing respect from peers. Isaiah said respect built on avoidance was fragile. She asked how to rebuild trust. Isaiah said by practicing it when it was costly. She thanked him, voice steady despite the tremor beneath. As she walked away, Isaiah felt a swell of protectiveness again, coupled with resolve. These moments mattered as much as policies. Isaiah finally left the building near midnight. The plaza was empty now, the fountain stilled. He paused where he had stood that morning, the memory of laughter lingering like an echo. The space felt different under the night sky, stripped of performance. He walked to his car slowly, breathing in the cold air. The coin rested in his pocket, familiar and grounding. At home, Isaiah did not sleep immediately. He sat at his kitchen table with his notebook, reviewing the day not as a narrative but as a series of decisions. He noted where he might have pushed too hard or not enough. He made lists, not of names, but of questions that would guide the next phase. In the early hours, messages continued to arrive. One was from an employee he had not met, thanking him for saying aloud what had been whispered. Another was from a manager worried about how to lead in this new openness. Isaiah read them all, resisting the urge to respond prematurely. Morning came too soon. Light filtered through the windows, pale and unassuming. Isaiah dressed simply and returned to the office. The building greeted him with a different energy. Eyes followed him now, not with dismissal, but with curiosity and, in some cases, expectation. He acknowledged people with nods and brief greetings, careful not to create distance through ceremony. The first listening session was scheduled for later that day. Facilitators arrived early, setting up rooms designed for circles rather than tables. Isaiah observed preparations, offering suggestions drawn from experience rather than authority. In one room, the young man from the plaza took a seat early, hands folded. Others joined slowly. The facilitator explained ground rules. Isaiah did not attend the session itself. He waited outside, respecting the space. Down the hall, the project lead led her own team meeting. Voices rose and fell. There were tears, pauses, moments of awkward honesty. She stumbled once, corrected herself, and continued. Isaiah heard fragments through the wall and felt a quiet acknowledgement of effort. The board chair passed Isaiah in the corridor. He said the press statement was receiving mixed reactions, as expected. Isaiah said consistency would outlast headlines. The chair nodded, grateful. By midday, tension surfaced again. A group of managers requested clarification about decision authority. Some questioned the fairness of interim measures. Isaiah met with them briefly, explaining the rationale without softening it. He said uncertainty was part of repair. Not everyone was satisfied, but the conversation remained grounded. News circulated that the director was contesting his leave through legal channels. The senior counsel informed Isaiah calmly. Isaiah said process would handle it. He did not allow the development to dominate his focus. In the cafeteria, conversations had changed tone. Laughter returned, but it was cautious, checked against awareness. Some employees ate quietly, absorbing the shift. Isaiah sat among them without announcement, listening. A woman approached him, someone he had not spoken to before. She said she had considered leaving the company the previous year. She said she might stay now. Isaiah thanked her for sharing, careful not to promise outcomes. Throughout the day, Isaiah moved between observation and intervention. He corrected language when it slipped into defensiveness. He praised specificity when it emerged. He resisted the urge to centralize himself, redirecting questions toward shared responsibility. Late afternoon brought another meeting with the board. This one was more procedural, outlining timelines and resources. Isaiah emphasized endurance. He said the temptation would be to declare progress early. He warned against it. As the meeting ended, the board chair asked Isaiah privately whether he regretted the approach he had taken. Isaiah considered. He said regret belonged to actions taken without reflection. This had been deliberate. Evening fell again. The building's lights glowed against the darkening sky. Isaiah stood once more by a window, watching people leave for the day. Their steps seemed lighter for some, heavier for others. He knew backlash would come, not just externally, but internally, as fatigue set in and old habits sought refuge. He also knew something irreversible had occurred. The silence that once protected carelessness had been broken. Isaiah gathered his things and prepared to leave. He paused in the corridor, where the director's office stood, door now closed and dark. He did not linger. Outside, the city breathed around him, indifferent yet responsive. Cars moved. Voices rose and fell. Life continued. Isaiah walked into the night with the awareness that the most visible confrontation had passed, but the deeper work was only beginning. The company stood at a threshold, and what followed would determine whether the rupture became a wound or a passage. He did not think in terms of victory. He thought in terms of responsibility extended forward, of vigilance maintained without spectacle. The next phase would require patience, persistence, and the willingness to remain present even when attention faded. As he drove away, the building receded in his rearview mirror, its lights steady against the dark. The reckoning had reached its peak, but the descent toward understanding had not yet begun, and Isaiah prepared himself for the long, necessary work that would follow. In the days that followed, the building settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar but deliberate, like a body learning to move after a long period of imbalance. The initial surge of emotion receded, replaced by something steadier and more demanding. There were fewer whispered conversations in hallways, fewer nervous jokes meant to release tension. In their place came questions, asked carefully at first, then with growing directness. Isaiah noticed the change in small ways. Meetings started on time more often. People paused before speaking, as if weighing not just what they wanted to say, but how it would land. Interruptions still happened, but they were sometimes acknowledged, corrected. These moments did not make headlines, but Isaiah knew they were where the work lived. The listening sessions continued throughout the week. Isaiah attended none of them directly, honoring the boundary he had set. But he read the summaries each evening. They were raw, uneven, sometimes contradictory. Pain surfaced alongside defensiveness. Gratitude appeared beside exhaustion. Isaiah did not seek consistency. He sought honesty. Some leaders struggled openly. A few requested coaching, unsure how to recalibrate habits that had once been rewarded. Others resisted quietly, complying with new expectations while waiting for attention to fade. Isaiah tracked both responses, understanding that change rarely moved in a straight line. The interim leadership structure took hold. New names appeared on organizational charts, some expected, others surprising. The project lead stepped into a broader role, supported by a mentor outside her previous chain of command. She worked longer hours now, not to prove herself, but to learn where she needed to slow down. Isaiah checked in once, briefly, reminding her that pace mattered as much as direction. The young man from the plaza became a quiet presence in meetings, speaking less often but with more care. When he did speak, others listened. He corrected a colleague once, gently, when a joke veered too close to dismissal. The room adjusted around that correction, awkwardly but without backlash. News from outside the company ebbed and flowed. Some coverage praised the actions taken. Other pieces questioned motives, speculated about leadership instability. Isaiah read them without reaction. He had expected scrutiny. What mattered more was whether internal commitments held under it. The director's absence reshaped more than one department. Projects stalled briefly, then resumed under shared decision-making. Some employees admitted relief. Others admitted fear. Isaiah acknowledged both reactions as valid, refusing to frame discomfort as failure. One afternoon, Isaiah met with the senior counsel and the compliance officer together. They reviewed early indicators from the external review. No conclusions yet, only themes emerging. Isaiah asked where resources were most needed. They spoke candidly about fatigue, about the emotional toll of sustained examination. Isaiah authorized additional support without hesitation. He also met with groups that had not spoken during the climax. Mid-level managers, long accustomed to translating directives downward without question, now found themselves uncertain. Isaiah told them uncertainty was an invitation, not a verdict. He encouraged them to ask before assuming, to listen before defending. In quieter moments, Isaiah reflected on his own role. He resisted the temptation to disappear again, knowing absence had once allowed drift. He also resisted the pull toward constant visibility, understanding that repair required shared ownership. He chose presence that was consistent but unshowy. One evening, after most employees had left, Isaiah walked the floors again. The building sounded different at this hour. Less echo, more purpose. He passed rooms where whiteboards were filled with revised processes, language crossed out and replaced. He did not stop to comment. At the plaza outside, a small group of employees gathered one morning for coffee before work. The fountain ran again, water catching the light. Someone laughed, freely this time, and others joined. The laughter carried no edge. Isaiah watched from a distance, allowing himself a brief, cautious hope. Challenges persisted. A manager resigned abruptly, unwilling to adapt. Another filed a complaint about the review itself. Isaiah addressed both situations directly, neither punitive nor indulgent. He understood that not everyone would stay. Toward the end of the second week, the board chair asked Isaiah how he wanted to proceed long-term. Isaiah said he would reassess his visibility after the review concluded. He said leadership should not depend on revelation to function. The chair agreed. The falling tension did not mean resolution. It meant space. Space for habits to be questioned, for trust to be tested slowly. Isaiah felt the weight of that space each morning when he walked into the building and felt eyes on him, not searching for authority now, but for consistency. As the days layered themselves one over another, the story of what had happened began to shift from shock to memory, from memory to reference. People spoke of it less often, but they acted differently because of it. That was the measure Isaiah watched. He knew the work ahead would be quieter than the reckoning that preceded it, less dramatic, more vulnerable. It would not offer the clarity of confrontation, only the discipline of follow-through. On a Friday afternoon, Isaiah sat at his desk and closed his notebook, feeling its familiar weight beneath his hand. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Inside, the company stood somewhere between what it had been and what it might become. Isaiah did not mistake this pause for an ending. He recognized it for what it was: a breath taken after upheaval, before the deeper settling that would define whether the change endured. He rose from his chair, ready to step into the next phase, aware that the final shape of the story had yet to be written. The final report arrived on a quiet Monday morning, bound simply and delivered without ceremony. Isaiah read it in full before the building fully woke, sitting at the same desk where he had once drafted the company's earliest plans. The findings were thorough and restrained, careful with language but firm in conclusion. Patterns were confirmed. Responsibility was traced not only to individuals, but to decisions that had been rewarded over time. By midday, the board convened. The vote was brief. Several leaders, including the director whose watch had once flashed in the plaza light, were formally removed from their roles. Others were reassigned to positions without authority over people, or exited with severance tied to non-disparagement and accountability clauses. The actions were communicated plainly, without flourish, and followed by explanations rooted in behavior rather than rumor. Isaiah stood with the board chair as the announcement went out. He felt no surge of victory, only a sober completion. Justice, when done correctly, felt quieter than revenge and heavier than applause. The company gathered later that afternoon for the town hall. The auditorium filled, not to capacity but with intention. People chose to be there. Isaiah walked onto the stage without introduction and waited for the room to settle. He spoke simply. He acknowledged harm without defensiveness. He named the removals without dramatizing them. He said accountability had to be visible to matter. He also said the work would continue beyond names and policies, into daily choices. He told them why he had hidden his identity. He said it was not a test designed to trick, but a mirror held up to ordinary moments. He said the way people behaved when they believed power was absent revealed what rules truly governed them. The room was still. Faces held relief, regret, determination. Isaiah thanked those who had spoken when it was costly. He thanked those who had listened when it was uncomfortable. He apologized for the distance his absence had created in earlier years. He said leadership was not a title but a practice, renewed every day. When he finished, there was no immediate applause. Then someone stood, then another. The sound that followed was steady, not explosive. It carried respect rather than spectacle. In the weeks that followed, the changes took root. Training sessions replaced old orientation scripts. Performance reviews were revised to include peer feedback. Managers learned to pause before speaking, to ask rather than assume. Some struggled and left, Others stayed and grew. The young man from the plaza was promoted, not as reward, but as recognition of steadiness. He accepted quietly and mentored others, remembering the cost of his early laughter. The project lead found her footing and learned to delegate without withdrawing. The facilities manager joined a cross-functional council, her insights shaping decisions that once bypassed her entirely. Isaiah adjusted his own role. He remained visible, attending meetings, walking floors, listening more than directing. He resisted the urge to be everywhere, choosing consistency over control. When asked why he did not retreat again, he said presence was a promise. Outside the company, interest faded as it always did. Headlines moved on. Inside, habits continued to change, imperfectly but persistently. One morning, months later, Isaiah stood again in the plaza. Employees passed him without surprise now, greeting him by name. The fountain ran. The city moved. He felt the coin in his pocket and smiled, then let it go. He knew the lesson would not hold forever without renewal. But he also knew it had been learned deeply enough to matter. The company was no longer what it had been that morning, and neither was he. Isaiah turned toward the building and walked inside, carrying forward a leadership grounded not in concealment or fear, but in clarity, protection, and the enduring work of justice.